All right, so we're going to get started. Welcome, everyone. My name is Justin Deutsch. I'm the program director at Houston Congregation for Reform Judaism. And as I mentioned, thanks everyone for coming, for joining us for this discussion of Isaac Artenstein's film, A Long Journey, The Hidden Jews of the Southwest. As I mentioned, I'm with HCRJ in Houston, but this is definitely not only a Houston crowd. In fact, this is a partnership between two different congregations, two different communities. And I think we have people from Florida and Canada and from all over as well, but we also have Temple Mount Sinai in El Paso and also Congregation B'nai Zion in El Paso. So Houston, El Paso, and all around. So again, thanks for coming this afternoon. And whether you watched, some of you may have just finished watching the film 5 minutes ago, some of you may have finished watching the film 5 days ago. But before we get into more of a discussion of the film, we thought we'd share the trailer to kind of, get us back in the mindset of what we saw watching the film. So here is a preview, the trailer of A Long Journey, The Hidden Jews of the Southwest.
Where the journey started as far as going back and finding out, okay, well, who are we? Where did this come from? These are family secrets that were never meant to be told to anybody.
I remember asking my dad when I was a young kid, what are we? Are we Spanish American? Are we Mexican American? My dad said, we are who we are.
My grandfather would say to us, if I were you, I would be very careful who you told these things to, because it's not popular, and in some cases it's not very safe to reveal a Jewish heritage.
My family didn't like the idea that I was Jewish. They felt kind of like betrayed that I converted.
There have been people who have said there's no such thing as crypto-Jews. It's a myth. These customs they do, they're not really Jewish customs. This is true. I mean, this is really a true thing that's happening.
It really is important to reclaim their Jewish heritage.
No one had told them who they really were.
And when they were doing the torture sessions, then the inquisitor would say, give another turn on the rack, which really pull the person apart.
How can they do this to us, How can they be so cruel with someone who wants to just give?
There is a yearning in people's hearts.
It's an amazing journey that these people go through.
Crypto-Judaism is always a mystery. The very nature is hidden. How did these people do it for 500 years?
I'm ready not to be exiled anymore. I'm ready to go home.
All right, so that's just a refresher for everyone. So we're gonna make this, this is gonna be a fun little, Q&A today. Isaac's gonna start off kind of with some remarks about the film, making the film, the background of the film, and then really it can be as interactive as you like. If you have questions for Isaac about, how this idea came about, his background, ideas for future films, all that good stuff, please put those in the chat throughout the discussion. We'll do all the questions through the chat, and then I'll read them off to Isaac. But anything you want to know about the film, please put it in the chat, and Isaac will answer it for you. So again, happy to have filmmaker Isaac Artenstein here today. He's the founder of a company called CineWest Productions, and the company was created to distribute and create documentaries focusing on the Americas and the Southwest. One of his kind of first films in this area, well, going back to Isaac's from Tijuana, Mexico. So back in 2005, he did a film on Tijuana, Mexico. More recently, he's done films on Jews of New Mexico, Jews of San Diego. Of course, this one, A Long Journey, The Hidden Jews of the Southwest, on crypto Jews and conversos. And he's also working on a film titled The Journeys of Harry Crosby. I think that one's also in progress, which is a portrait of a pioneer photographer and historian of the Baja California Peninsula. Those could be for another day, but today we're talking about A Long Journey, The Hidden Jews of the Southwest. And here is Isaac Artenstein. Oops, gotta unmute him first here.
Can everybody hear me?
Yep, we got you.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Justin, again for organizing this wonderful event. I thoroughly enjoy Q&As because that's where a filmmaker gets a good sense how the film is working. In the old days, pre-COVID, part of the experience was being in the theater with everybody, but now I'm getting used to this format. I'm really embracing it. Because like you said, Justin, we have people not only from Texas, but from all over, and it makes it really, really special. As Justin said, this documentary is part of a film series that I've been working on kind of unintentionally. It's called Frontier Jews. And the reason I say unintentionally is because when I graduated from film school, I wanted to make independent feature films and documentaries. I never thought I would be doing something about my own Jewish identity. I just didn't figure in my list of films that I wanted to make. But as I lived and grew up in San Diego, I'm originally from Mexico, Tijuana, Mexico, right across the border. They're kind of twin cities, as many of you have experienced it to some extent in El Paso, Juarez. There's a lot of shared geographies, cultures, business, family relations, and so on. But one of the things that I noticed in the States is people cannot conceive that there were Jews in Mexico. How does an Artenstein come from Mexico? And I would explain to them, well, in the 1920s, when Zayda Fischl Artenstein came from Poland, Ellis Island was close to immigration. There was quotas. So the next logical place for the boat to drop him off, if you will, was Veracruz, Mexico. And the rest is history, at least for the Artenstein family. What brought my family to the border, it was during World War II. In the 1940s, my family lived in northern and central Mexico, Mexico City and Chihuahua to be specific. And there was such a boom in Tijuana during World War II, given that the largest naval base during World War II in the West Coast was San Diego, California. So there was just a lot of economic activity and dynamics. And Tijuana was a boomtown. The curio shops, much like El Juarez, were just booming. And of course, there was a racetrack. There was the Highlight Games. Tijuana also with its dark legend, you know, the Sin City legend that has always tried to live down, was very much a factor of that popularity. But it also had a Jewish community, a very active Jewish community, about 600 people when I was growing up in the 60s. Now, how did A Long Journey come about? Well, subsequent documentaries to Tijuana Jews, which played festivals all over. There was a documentary that I made, Portrait of Jewish San Diego, with the San Diego History Center. And I also did a wonderful documentary that I'm very proud of, that maybe some of you have seen, called Challah Rising in the Desert, The Jews of New Mexico. I directed this with the support of my producer, Paula Amar Schwartz, who was then she was a president of the Jewish Historical Society of New Mexico. And it was a really wonderful, wonderful experience. We interviewed over 40 people, descendants of pioneers, Jewish pioneers that came to New Mexico back in the 1840s, 1830s, 40s, via the Santa Fe Trail. And we also interviewed some descendants of Anusim, Converso Jews, hidden Jews, Sephardim that had fled Spain in the 1490s, 1492 to be exact, because of the Edict of Expulsion. Many of you know the fact that there was a lively community for centuries in Spain, Sephardic Jews, but in 1492, two things happened. Columbus sailed the blue seas, and the kings of Spain, Ferdinand and Isabella, the Catholic kings, proclaimed the Edict of Expulsion. The Catholic kings had just triumphed over the Muslims, the Moors, so-called, in Spain. They were kicked out, or the Catholic kings had reconquered Spain, if you will, and part of that victory meant that everybody had to convert to Catholicism or simply leave Spain. You could convert and stay, or you had to leave Spain. Well, many people, my family among them, my mother is of Sephardic descent, the Nachmiases, had to leave and ended up, the majority of them in the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire opened its arms wide to Jewish immigration. They saw the value of having people that were very successful in philosophy, the arts, medicine, come to their kingdom. But many of them actually fled to the so-called New World, namely, in our story, to Mexico, what was then the New Spain, colonial Spain, because they actually came to Mexico early on. There is documentation that they were Sephardic Jews aboard Columbus's ship. Also documentation, very specific documentation, that Hernan Cortez, the conqueror of Mexico, also had among his soldiers Sephardic Jews that were fleeing the Inquisition. They were pretending to be Christian. One of them actually was found out to be a hidden Jew among the troops of Hernan Cortez and was summarily executed. Flash forward to Challah Rising in the Desert. I'm making the rounds in the Jewish film festivals. And as I said, I love the Q&As, but these Q&As were different with Challah Rising in the Desert. Since we dealt with the colonial Jews of New Mexico, instead of questions, a lot of the time, somebody in the audience would get up and very emotionally share their story. I grew up Catholic. They would start their presentation, not their question, and say, but I recently discovered that my family is of Jewish descent. They would share, yeah, grandmother lit candles on Friday nights, mumbled these prayers. None of us understood. We would ask, what is grandma doing? Oh, that's just an old lady's ritual that she likes to do on Fridays. Also, they would share the fact that all the things that gave them clues that they were Jewish. And then with DNA and really speeded up genealogical research because of the internet, they in fact documented that they were descendants of Jews that fled Spain and ended up primarily in northern New Mexico, as you know from the documentary, and but then spread throughout the Southwest. There were converso communities in Texas, San Antonio, in, of course, southern Colorado, which at that time, in colonial times, was part of New Mexico, the territory of Nuevo Mexico. And the story was really fascinating, and a very transcendent thing when we were making Challah Rising was an exhibit that I wish everybody would have seen at the Palace of the Governors, the Museum of History in Santa Fe, New Mexico, the State Museum of History. It was called The Fractured Faiths, Jews of Spain, or Jews of Spanish descent. The entire museum had been converted into the very famous synagogue that is now Santa Maria la Blanca. It's actually a church now. So you walked into this Jewish synagogue, a recreation of a Jewish synagogue, where the most amazing exhibit of the Jewish Spanish experience was curated. And you would see Torahs from the 15th century that had left Spain for the first time on exhibit. Sephardic Torahs, as you know, there's a specific quality to Sephardic Hebrew script. As a matter of fact, Ladino, the language of the Sephardim, is a form of Spanish, but like Yiddish, it uses Hebrew characters. I interviewed there. I had the very great fortune. my producer and I, Paula Amar Schwartz, interviewed a really wonderful scholar, Ron Hart, in Hollow Rising, whom you met in A Long Journey, The Hidden Jews of the Southwest. Ron Hart not only is a really amazing principal scholar in the Sephardic world, the history, the culture, he's a cultural historian. So it was really great to be able to subsequently work with Ron in the creation of A Long Journey, and the timing was just amazing. And I'm going to wind this up because I'm looking forward to your questions, but it's important to note the process of, so after all these people were giving us their testimonials at our screenings of The Jews of New Mexico, Paul and I decided we need to make a sequel focusing on the Anusim, on the conversos in the Southwest. And fortunately, as things would have it, we talked to the head of New Mexico Public Television, Franz Joachim. It was the fastest funding I have ever gotten for any film I've ever made. Usually it takes 3 to 5 years to fund an independent project. This one took 3 to 6 months. And as we were developing the film, talking to Ron Hart, talking to my producer would call, Isaac, I was just at a Jewish Federation meeting and I met this wonderful man that we need to interview, his family actually. His name is Timothy Herrera, and he's documented his Sephardic ancestry. He has returned to Judaism. Anusim, conversos that want to return, don't consider it a conversion. They feel that they were kicked out of the, they were, basically had to convert forcibly generations back. So they're returning to Judaism. He's returning, and he has a ranch, a cattle ranch in northern New Mexico in a town called Cuba, New Mexico. And I said, oh my God, a cowboy converso from Cuba, New Mexico. Let's do it. And then I got another contact. I had met through Ron Hart via telephone, Rabbi Stephen Leon, who will also be doing a Q&A with this whole program. Justin will have information on that. But I talked to the rabbi, and at that time, he was starting to go across the border to Juarez, as you saw in the documentary, working with people in Juarez, Mexico, who wanted to return, but didn't have a visa to take his classes on the American side. So the dynamics were getting very, very interesting for our film. Through Rabbi Leon, I met Blanca Carrasco, who had this magical moment, besides the fact that when she returned to Judaism and became a member of B'nai Zion, she also became the president of her sisterhood. She did the newsletter for the temple. But during the shoot, we interviewed her and then came back for additional interviews and pickup shots. She had actually gotten her entire genealogical book put together, as you saw in the documentary. That happened during the shooting of the documentary. So the second time, it was a whole different experience interviewing her, because she had the facts there. She was a descendant of the Salinas Garza families of Monterrey, Mexico, probably the two most prominent last names next to Carvajal of converso Jewish Mexico, colonial Mexico. So the documentary just kept on enriching itself with these wonderful people that through our mutual contacts, we kept on meeting. And of course, during the preparation of the documentary, Ron Hart, as president of the Jewish Federation of New Mexico, had been designated the person in charge of facilitating Sephardic certificates for those wishing to apply for Spanish or Portuguese citizenship, a form of reparations to Jews that had suffered at the hands of the Inquisition, or with the expulsion of the Jews. that both Portuguese and Spanish governments were having. And Albuquerque at that time became the center for these applications where people would bring their genealogical research. DNA was not really a factor in certifying your Sephardic background, but genealogical or other types of research, such as basically researching the files of the Inquisition. The Inquisition kept very detailed records of their persecution of the Jews, such as the trials, and the execution of Jews. By the way, it's been noted in history books that Hitler took a lot of inspiration and cues and practical tips from the Inquisition in his endeavors persecuting and trying to exterminate the Jewish people. Another thing that I might add, and again, looking forward to questions, creatively, I was very fortunate to work with the same crew I've used in my last 4 or 5 films. Director of photography, Sergio Ulloa, my editor, Keith Shapiro, and a long journey represented for me as a filmmaker that I actually worked with drones. Everybody uses drones nowadays. You can't see a documentary without drones. You can't buy a house online when you're looking for a house without drone shots of the house. Drones are very popular. So we had a really wonderful drone operator working with my director of photography and myself. And one of the things that I learned, as you can see in the documentary, drones are very effective for establishing a very good dynamic in the narrative of a documentary, especially a cultural, historical documentary, in that you can really set the stage for the characters, for your story with the drones, in that you can very effectively document natural landscapes, cultural landscapes, and for a story that takes place, we shot in, 4 different states in Mexico, including Mexico City, and 3 states in the American Southwest. So for me, there was a learning curve. And one of the first things that you learn with the use of drones, they're not just for fancy, amazing aerial shots. You can practically bring drones to eye level, and it's a moving, flying camera that can get smoothly and with precision to areas that in the past you can really easily do with a camera, with a land camera, if you will. So that kind of cinematic technique, language, I felt really helped me enrich the visual presentation of the story we were telling. And in terms of editing, I want to highlight something. I mentioned it's the 3rd time that I worked with this crew, and my editor, Keith Shapiro, an extremely talented editor from Los Angeles, California, who's done great work for Arts and Entertainment Channel, for Netflix. He was a lead editor in a very powerful documentary that the Shoah Foundation supported on Auschwitz specifically. And with Keith, he's very story-driven, as a good editor should be, as any good filmmaker should be, but specifically an editor. We would transcribe every single interview for each project. Each project has an average of about 40 to 50 hours of interviews. How do you reduce 40 hours of interviews to a 1-hour documentary to tell your story? That's the biggest challenge. We're fortunate to get all this wonderful information, but what stays in the documentary and what stays in the proverbial editing room floor? One of the things is you have to establish a theme, not the subject. We knew the subject was, of course, the hidden Jews of New Mexico. We knew the subject in Hollow Rising was, the Jews of New Mexico, I'm sorry, the hidden Jews of the Southwest, the Jews of New Mexico, the Jews, that's the subject matter. But what is the theme? What is a larger story? What is the message, if you will, that you're trying to say? And whatever speaks from those interviews to that message, to that theme, is what stays. So we would take the bundle of transcripts, well, it was PDF on a drive, and just read through them and highlight things. What themes do we find there? And we would come back together the next week, and we would say, and we would laugh after the third time, there's 3 themes to our documentary: identity, identity, and identity. That's what my documentaries are about in dealing with the Jewish experience. And of course, that's reflected very much in A Long Journey. I mean, think about it. You have Jews, we claim our origins in the Middle East, in Israel, and we suffered the diaspora. And in the specific case of the Sephardic Jews, we journeyed throughout Western Europe, ended up in Spain, and then with the expulsion, many families, many Jews ended up in the Ottoman Empire, others in the New World. By the way, in A Long Journey, we focus on the Jews, the hidden Jews of the Southwest, but it is a worldwide phenomenon, mainly in the Caribbean, where Jews were euphemistically known as Portuguese, because Portugal gave refuge initially to the Sephardim that left Spain. So as a matter of fact, the first synagogue in the New World, in the Caribbean, was a Sephardic synagogue. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the first synagogue in the continental United States was also of Sephardic origin. Anyways, I promise not to talk real long at the beginning, because I'd like to get to some of the questions, if there's any. Justin, do we see anything in our box?
Yeah, oh yeah. And I'll start with you were talking about challenges, and you started off with question comes from Noel, talking about challenges making this film. You know, you talked about the start financially. This film might not have been as much of a challenge as other ones because of PBS's support. You mentioned editing, and cutting down the footage down to an hour is a challenge. What are some other challenges that you may have faced putting together this documentary?
The very most important challenge, perhaps, once you've taken care of the funding and all the other things that you mentioned, is gaining the trust of the people that you want to interview. Why should I talk to this guy? And especially in the case of Converso Jews, these are stories that were hidden, that were secret. Yes, this generation of people, the ones that I'm hoping to interview, are fully functioning, active members of Jewish communities now. Some of them are in the process of joining, as they are in the sequences that we filmed in Ciudad Juarez. But for instance, a dear friend, an amazing man, Bill Carvajal, a descendant of the Carvajals of Monterrey, Mexico, he, of course, had heard about me. He trusted me. Rabbi Leon introduced us, but he says, I simply don't feel comfortable in front of a camera sharing my story. It's a personal thing. And I said, Bill, you know what? You're the heir of the Carvajal last name. I'm going to plead with you to please sit down, talk to me. And my technique, what really breaks down walls, what really kind of melts the ice, is that I have the ability, after interviewing over 300 Jews in my career, to really do this as a personal kind of a conversation. I told Bill, forget about the cameras, forget about the lights, forget about the microphones. It's just you and me in this room, and you're sharing your story to a good friend who is really interested in your story. So my challenge is to gain the trust of the people that I'm going to interview. And then, like any other film, the creative challenge, like one thing I talked about was boiling down or paring down the interviews to 1 hour. And for those of you interested in the process of filmmaking, especially with documentaries that are interview driven, we have a thing called the A-roll, which comes from television and news reporting. You basically lay down the text, you sort of cut and paste the transcripts. Everything that is interview is A-roll. And once you basically do what we call a radio cut, we get every single piece of the interview in a narrative order. That's another challenge, finding not only the theme, but the narrative, because documentaries, like feature films, like fiction films, like dramatic films, have a story, a narrative, and in structure, not that different than your favorite film that you saw either on Netflix or in the old days in the movie theater. You just need to tell a story. The fact that you have a wonderful, interesting subject is not engaging unto itself. You can write a book about it, but if you're making a film, you have an hour or 90 minutes to engage your audience. So that's the other challenge. How do I engage my audience? And it's applying identifying the theme, and then a narrative structure, which is really in essence a 3-act structure. And one thing that's very helpful to me, and I teach screenwriting, besides teaching the 3-act structure, there's a wonderful, wonderful book, those of you interested in storytelling, filmic or otherwise, it's called The Writer's Journey, and it's based on the great mythologist, Joseph Campbell, The 12 Steps of the Hero. We human beings have been telling stories since time immemorial with the structure of the hero's journey, the 12 steps of the hero's journey. And Mr. Campbell, Dr. Campbell, I must say, by the way, George Lucas credits the success of his storytelling in Star Wars to Joseph Campbell's work, learning mythic structure. And of course, when you're dealing with Jewish stories, mythic structure really, really applies, or any story. So I kind of, once I get my A-roll together, my interviews, I structure it with mythic structure, 3-act structure, beginning, middle, and end, very much in mind. That is a real creative challenge. Of course, it's in the comfort of the editing room with plenty of coffee and snacks. It's not like when you're out there in the field trying to shoot and convince people, but it is still a challenge, a creative challenge, albeit. So that's my laundry list of challenges that I face as a filmmaker.
And this question comes from Marilyn. She is asking, she mentioned that her son-in-law's father parents, they come from Mexico and they may be conversos. And how could her son-in-law, his father, start to look to see if they actually were crypto Jews, conversos?
Let's see. Well, out of curiosity, what is the last name of the family that has these converso roots?
Is it?
It was Santos, and then they changed it to Santos Goy.
Okay. All right. Well, did you see the documentary already? Okay. The way that people in New Mexico are doing it very effectively is to find a genealogist that can help you with that. And what does a genealogist need? They need any documents of your family as far back as you can go, parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, whether they be birth certificates, marriage certificates, death certificates. You magically scan them and turn them over to a genealogist, and then they do their magic. In the case of the genealogist in A Long Journey, he's now retired, Mr. Mays. He already has a database of 300,000 people in New Mexico. So if you're from New Mexico and doing your genealogist, you would go directly to Mr. Mays, and very likely he would plug in that information from your family, and he would come up with a book that would be, I've seen them, about 300 pages long. And many of them, the majority, if not all of them, going back to medieval Spain. It is an amazing, amazing work. DNA helps also, of course, because although there's a lot of controversy around DNA, but DNA, a good DNA, an accurate DNA reading would show Iberian background from the Iberian Peninsula in one way or another. Sometimes it's North African because Iberia and North Africa, because of the Moorish conquest of Spain, had similar roots for centuries. So that would be my best approach. And then whatever family members are still alive, you know. I mentioned how I became interested in doing documentaries about my background. I was the one that loved to talk to my grandparents, just finding out stories. I would just sit and I wish I was a young kid, you know, they passed away when I was a teenager. I just wish I had asked more questions, because nowadays I know so much more about the family. One thing that I discovered, we never knew where my grandpa Nachnias, my maternal grandfather, they would always say, oh, he's Turkish, he's Sephardic, he's Turkish. Yes, but where was he born? Oh, Alexandria or Istanbul. They never knew. For some reason, my parents' generation, they just took their parents' background for granted. You know, their mom and dad, they never were as obsessed as we are with their background. So I found out very recently within the last 5 or 10 years, the Jewish community of Mexico went to the State Department of Mexico and did an amazing, amazing job. If you came to Mexico, like my grandpa did in the 20s, you would eventually get a certificado de extranjero, kind of your green card, if you will, but it's more of a document than a card. And it says exactly where you came from, port of entry, where you were born. Mexico has that. There's a Jewish, Mexican Jewish archives. They're online, not the archives, but themselves, the materials, but you can contact them. And I got it as a DVD because I had so much data. So every single certificado de extranjero had been scanned, and you would just simply look for your family's last name, and those certificates would say what religion the immigrant was. And of course, they would never put Jewish. Judío, Jew, just sounded bad, you know, coming to a Catholic country especially. So they would put religion, Hebrea, Israelita, you know. And that's how I found my grandfather's certificate. And lo and behold, he was from Greece. He was a Greek citizen. Salonika, one of the great Jewish centers of the old world, where Sephardic Jews, Salonika in Greece, had a population of about 50,000 people. You could not really conduct business in Salonika if you didn't speak Ladino. Such was the preponderance of Sephardic Jews in Salonika. And then, of course, my heart filled with pride when I found out that the developer of the Pfizer vaccine is from Salonika. So that gave me a lot of bragging rights. That's one of the great joys you get from family research.
And talking a little bit further about last names, Judy's inquiring about the lore out there that anyone with an EZ ending in their last name were conversos, and asking if that's true. And also for Portuguese, if their last name ends in ES, would they be considered conversos, crypto Jews, or if that lore is true?
I don't know if it's scientifically true, but a lot of converso Jews last names ends in EZ and ES. But then again, a lot of non-converso Spanish Jews, I mean, Spanish people have the same ending. But I've heard about that. I can't vouch for it, really. I'm always surprised to learn about the last names that are, you know, there's Calderon, there's many. I've heard that. I can't vouch for it. I can only say that both Jews and non-Jews coming from Spain have last names ending in those two letters.
Were most of the people that you met through the film, did they speak, are they fluent in Ladino? Do you know?
No, not at all, as a matter of fact. The ones in New Mexico, like many people in New Mexico, spoke Spanish. Blanca Carrasco, she spoke Spanish because she grew up in Mexico. And also, what we have found out through research and talking to scholars like Ron Hart is there was an idea that the conversos, descendant of conversos, in fact spoke Ladino, and they maintained Ladino into contemporary times. But the fact is that Ladino very much sounds like the Spanish that people from Spain, independent of their religious or ethnic background, spoke. It's very old Spanish. And Ladino has another characteristic, like Yiddish, in that Yiddish is not just old German. Of course, its roots are in old German. Ladino, its roots are in old Castilian Spanish, the Spanish that's spoken in Spain and Latin America. But Ladino, when you think about it, linguistically, and you look about it, it incorporates a lot of words from Turkish, from different lands that Sephardic Jews live in. As they incorporate different words, we also incorporate, as you well know, and we make our own, the foods. I mean, falafel, hummus, pitas, those are really Middle Eastern foods, but now they're as Jewish as any other food. Same with Ashkenazi Jews. I don't think when our ancestors lived in Israel, they enjoyed pastrami on rye or brisket. That's an Eastern European addition. So as we have foods added to our table, we also have words. So Ladino is very specific, and it didn't survive in converso populations. Now, my mom, my grandma, growing up in Mexico, they spoke Ladino, but Ladino was so similar to Spanish that it eventually just became mainstream contemporary Spanish with a few words in Ladino. There is, and people interested in the Sephardic experience should know, an incredible renaissance in Ladino learning, understanding, research. As a matter of fact, the University of Washington in Seattle, its Judaic studies is one of the most prominent, focusing on Sephardic studies. So we're finding more and more things about Ladino Sephardic experience, and they have one of the largest archives of Ladino texts in the world at the University of Washington. You might just want to cruise through their website, and there's just great stuff, great programs, great research, great archives going on about the Sephardic experience, and specifically about Ladino. I have to share a quick story about Ladino. A dear friend of mine, Miriam Moscona, she's a very gifted poet from Mexico, of Sephardic background. Her family came from Bulgaria after World War II, I believe, and Bulgarian Jews were spared, unlike Salonika Jews from the Nazis. Salonika was under the control of Greece, and the Nazis occupied Greece. However, the Ottoman Empire was not occupied by the Nazis, so Bulgarian Jews were spared. So when her family came, by the way, the word in Turkey among Sephardic Jews is not Ladino. They speak Judeo. That's their word for Spanish, or Judeo. And she says when her parents got off the boat in Veracruz and heard Spanish, they said, "Oh my God, Mexico's filled with Jews. They all seem to speak Judeo." Of course, they were speaking Spanish. So anyways, a brief and abbreviated story of Sephardic from the Artenstein household experience.
Neat. So we have a couple questions about one of the individuals we interviewed extensively in the film, Tim Herrera. So the first one comes from Bruce and Carol. Seeing if you can talk more about the family, the Herrera family, and they mentioned that they thought that area in Cuba, New Mexico was mostly Apache tribal land. And also at the end of the film, Tim mentions that he was going to move with his family to Israel. And so Elaine wants to know, did the cowboy in the film who wanted to move to Israel move there, or is he still working on it?
Okay, what was the first part of the question? I'm sorry.
It was just more about the history of more about the Herrera family.
Okay, all right, gotcha.
And they mentioned here they thought that Bruce and Carol mentioned that they thought that the area where he was farming was mostly Apache tribal land.
I am not sure about the tribal land. In New Mexico, of course, you connect very much with the Navajo tribal lands, and there's the Four Corner regions and so on. I'm not sure if it was in fact Apache land. We didn't deal with it in the documentary. What we know is that it's been Hispanic farmers in that part of New Mexico for many, many generations, many centuries, as with Tim Herrera's family. he researched his story, if you remember from the documentary, his family's genealogy going back to Spain, the Archbishop of Burgos, a Jewish sage by the name of Abraham Halevi, who converted to Catholicism and became the mentor of the heir of the Spanish crown. They trusted a converted Jew to teach their child, the same kings that had kicked out the Jews. He actually traced his roots to that Abraham Halevi. And he talks about it, La Jara, Cuba, New Mexico, that part of northern New Mexico. That's where we go to the cemetery with Tim Herrera, and he finds tombstones and crosses of his family's, grave sites with rocks, with the Jewish tradition of putting rocks when you visit a grave site. So that's a historical background. I have to reveal something very interesting that, as Tim says, he had a lot of difficulty with his family, as many converso Jews have, that they announced to the family, hey, guess what? We're Jewish. We want to embrace our Judaism. And in the case of Tim Herrera and his family, we want to make Aliyah to Israel. And the family says, well, you might consider yourself Jewish. We're Catholics. We're good Catholics, and we appreciate you not saying that we're Jewish or of Jewish descent. You can say you're Jewish if you want. And by the way, I guess you won't be coming to our Christmas celebrations anymore since you're Jewish. And please don't talk to our children about Judaism. We're raising them Catholic, as we have for generations. Very difficult, very emotional for Timothy to come to terms. I must say, though, that family members have called after seeing the documentary and have had a reckoning, which is one of the magical things that this documentary has resulted in, this rapprochement with a lot of the conversos and their families, an understanding. As far as Tim's Aliyah, by the way, Tim Herrera sold his ranch in New Mexico. He's now living near Houston. He might be joining us. I don't know. There's another synagogue in Houston that's a conservative synagogue. One of the requirements for Aliyah is that he join a conservative synagogue. But to this date, he's having problems with his Aliyah procedure, compounded by the pandemic and also compounded by politics in Israel. It seems that the arms are not as open for anybody and everybody that's wishing to make Aliyah. They become much more strict, and it's a source of incredible distress for Tim. I talked with Tim, and I interviewed him. He actually addresses this in the interview. I said, Tim, what's wrong with being a New Mexico Jew? I think it's the coolest thing, you know. I wish I would love to live in Santa Fe and call myself a New Mexico Jew. And he says, well, my roots are in Israel. I mean, that's the land of our people. And I go, well, what about this issue of Spanish citizenship? You're a Sephardic Jew, what's wrong? Maybe Spanish citizenship. He says, no, I see Spain as one of the parts of our exile. I want to go back to Israel. When I visited Israel, that's where I felt that I belong. The Negev has similar topography and geography as northern New Mexico. I know how to raise cattle in that region. That's what I want to do. And my wife wants to put a butcher shop, a kosher butcher shop, and a New Mexico style kosher restaurant. That's my dream. And that's his dream for his 9 children. They're all ready and willing to move to Israel, but they've not been able to. And again, that's a longer conversation about the current state of the Aliyah and so on. As you know, in Israel, there's a lot of debates now going on. The chief rabbis they're not as open to conversions, people wanting to come to Israel and so on, that have recently converted. And also, I think there's a debate now with the Ugandan Jewish community. I don't think they've been deemed kosher enough to go to Israel just yet. So unfortunately, I think that's the timing. That's what's going on with Tim. And that's why he's still in the United States.
This question comes from Lee. Lee wants to know, are you familiar with the Los Lunas Decalogue Stone in Chaco Canyon?
Absolutely. We almost filmed there. We almost filmed there because my producing partner, my producer, Palomar Schwartz, has done research into that stone. She actually took the film to Los Lunas, Holorizing the Desert, showed it there and had lively discussions. And that stone came up. And as many of you might know, it's an inscription in Hebrew that's believed to go back to, I don't know exactly what century. And there's debates, as always there is, with ancient cultures. Were they put there by somebody after the fact, pretending to be somebody from ancient times? Are they ancient, carvings or not? So I do know about them. We almost went there and filmed, but again, trying to cover the state of New Mexico. With Holorizing, we had to kind of, focus on what we wanted to shoot. That was during Holorizing. With A Long Journey, the documentary, by the way, I must mention this, the style of A Long Journey is different from my previous documentaries. For Tijuana Jews, 40 or 50 members of the Tijuana Jewish community were interviewed. They tell collectively their story. I find the intersecting narratives to tell the story. Same with Holorizing, same with Portrait of Jewish San Diego. In A Long Journey, instead of having this chorus approach to telling the community story, as you saw, we selected specific individuals, 5 or 6. We follow them. So we really focused on their stories and did not do the kind of broad focus that maybe would have included that those carving, those scripts near Los Lunas. But I know they're there and they're the subject of research, debate, and interest, which to me is fine. If people are debating and discussing, at least it means that there's a lively interest in our story, our history, and its roots.
And with all the, you mentioned all the extra, what you said, 40 to 50 hours of footage and narrowing it down to an hour. So a couple questions kind of related to that. With all that extra footage you have, Elaine wants to know, what's going to happen to that? Could it be used, are you going to use it on other potential production? And kind of connected to that, Sandra also asks, do you plan to do any updates or sequels to the film, as there's such, interest obviously in the film and also the individuals that were portrayed?
A very pertinent and timely question. Right now, I'm working with the Jewish Community Foundation of San Diego. We have about 90 hours of interviews combined from the Tijuana and San Diego Jewish projects. We're going to curate them, edit them, sort of as video oral archives. It's kind of a contradiction in terms. But, in an oral interview, it's more of a linear chronological interview. So what I'm going to do with the 90 hours of interviews, I'm going to take all the questions and interruptions that directors are given to. In a film interview, since I'm going to be editing it, I feel I have the privilege of asking people to repeat things, to clarify things, to say them in a different way that'll fit the previous narrative. And they're very accommodating because it's a conversation. So I will take out all those directions and just leave a streamlined testimonial of the person, of those 90 people or 90 hours of interviews. So we will edit and curate the interviews to create the Jewish San Diego border region archives. And we will transcribe every interview, and also the ancillary materials, all the photos, the family photos that are scanned, they will be deposited in the San Diego History Center. For those of you that have visited San Diego, it's the main history museum at Balboa Park, our central, wonderful Balboa Park here in town. In terms of other uses of the archival, so what is the use of this archival material? When researchers down the way want to research the Jewish presence here in the San Diego, Tijuana border region, I must say, all modesty set aside, they will have one of the richest testimonials they can find at the archives. The San Diego History Center is really wonderful about preserving and making materials available to people. They put stuff online. It's really great in that way. But also, as I mentioned earlier, my dream with all these documentaries that I'm doing, there's 2 documentaries that I'm actively developing, pursuing, to complement the frontier Jews story. It really starts for me geographically in El Paso, where some of my family roots are, and it ends in San Diego. Those of you that have seen Tijuana Jews, and if you haven't, you can go to cinewest.net and you can download it for a very reasonable price through Vimeo. Tijuana Jews, all my documentaries actually. But with El Paso specifically, I'm talking to different people. I have funding from the partial funding from the Feinberg Foundation to do a 1-hour documentary specifically about El Paso Jews. We covered the colonial history of Jews in El Paso in A Long Journey, but I laughingly tell Rabbi Stephen Leon, who's very supportive of this project, now we got to tell the Marty Robbins El Paso story. You know, Jews were very central during pioneer times in El Paso, Texas. And as the name implies, the pass, El Paso, Paso del Norte, as it was a thoroughfare for populations north and south because of the Camino Real, coming from Mexico City and going all the way to Santa Fe. El Paso was a key crossing since colonial times, well, also in subsequent eras for Jewish immigrants, merchants, and also a key figure in El Paso, which I hope to deal with in the El Paso episode, is Rabbi Zielonka. Rabbi Zielonka, like many Jews at the turn of the 20th century, became very, very preoccupied with pogroms in Eastern Europe, you know, again, on the rise with all the revolutions, the wars. Pogroms became part of the Jewish experience in Poland, Russia, Lithuania, Eastern Europe in general. And the preoccupation was not only to save the Jews of Eastern Europe, find them a homeland, bring them to the New World, to America, but there was another problem. Americans, Jews, were really starting to face anti-Semitism as a result of practically every boat of refugees coming from Eastern Europe with Jews landed in New York. They wanted to spread it a little bit more. So in came the Galveston Project, where there was a lot of support resources to bring Jews to Texas through Galveston, as opposed to Ellis Island, and also to perhaps settle Jews in Mexico. Rabbi Zielonka had conversations with the Mexican government if they would be amenable to having large-scale immigration of Jews into Mexico. And initially, there was very positive reception from the Mexican government, to the degree, I have a book in the shelf, see those shelves behind me, about the fact, documentation, that American Jews were negotiating with the Mexican government to buy extensive plots of land throughout the Baja California Peninsula to resettle Jews in Baja. The Mexican Revolution exploded in 1910, and that conversation just fell apart. Mexico would have been as dangerous to anybody as Eastern Europe to Jews because of the large-scale fighting going on during the revolution. So in that sense, the El Paso episode is really key. I also want to film in Arizona. This project, ironically, of Frontier Jews actually started at the Tucson Jewish Film Festival. Those of you that follow the Jewish festivals, Tucson has one of the oldest and best Jewish festivals in the United States, as far as I'm concerned. And we premiered Tijuana Jews there. And I was taken out to a great meal afterwards in Tucson. And one of the organizers handed me a book. It was called Pioneer Jews by Harriet and Fred Rockland. I highly, highly recommend it. It is a wonderful pictorial book about Jews of the West. And I'm talking, when I say the West, from Galveston, all through the West and up California, up Oregon, up Washington, and Alaska, all with richly illustrated with photographs of Jewish families, Jewish individuals of the West. So they told me something that was a revelation to me, and that's what inspires many filmmakers: unknown stories, unsung heroes. And Josh Protas, who was working with Jewish Federation and part of the festival, says, did you know that Tucson has had 5 Jewish mayors going back to the Old West? I said, I had no clue. And on the cover was Mayor Strauss. There was this old Jewish guy with his little grandson dressed as cowboys, one holding a Winchester and guns, like real Yiddish cowboys. And he was a mayor of Tucson. So that's when this whole story of frontier Jews really came to fruition. We actually filmed a lot of interviews in Arizona, southern Arizona. However, other projects came online before I could get funding for Arizona. But Arizona has a wonderful, wonderful Jewish history, as does the entire Southwest. We're breaking with this stereotype, us filmmakers, scholars doing research work in the American Southwest, the stereotype, not all Jews come from New York or Los Angeles. I mean, they have the largest, most dynamic Jewish communities, but that's not the only place where Jews have made a life, where Jews have a history, where Jews have impacted on those states and the culture, the economy. But also, I have to say, and this is very important, as we have an impact in the regions where our families settle, those regions also have an impact on us culturally. We maintain a lot of our traditions, a lot of our culture, language, and so on. There is, of course, a process of assimilation that's undeniable, but also we impact those regions in which we live. We bring a lot of cultural, historical, culinary traditions to those regions. I mean, I walk out of my house here in San Diego, and within 5 miles, there's about 6 bagel shops. They didn't have them before the Old West or during the Old West. So, and another very significant thing that I find very inspiring, for some reason, I think it was sort of the far West, the open spaces, Jews were able to actually, the first office holders, federal, regional, state, local, in the Jewish experience actually came from the West. You find in Pioneer Jews photograph of Jewish mayors throughout the Southwest, Jewish sheriffs, Jewish judges, office holders, and that's a real interesting thing. For one thing, Jews, I don't believe we're the chosen people. I don't like that stereotype. It's too heavy a burden to carry. But one thing that I'm very proud of, we are the literate people. No matter what little village Jews are from or they settle in, the first thing that the community does is open up a Jewish cemetery and some sort of schooling for the kids, Jewish schooling. We learn to read and write no matter where we are. I'm generalizing, of course. So that tradition, when Jews came to the Old West, where not everybody was literate, the fact that they had some kind of an education gave them a leg up. The fact that they didn't have the burdens of heavy concentration of Jewish ghettos like in the East Coast, with the attending tensions and drama and anti-Semitism, the West in general, we can say, was very welcoming to Jews, and an area that we were able to impact very positively, and that it also had its cultural impact on us. I showed Tijuana Jews all over the States. I went to, where was I? Somewhere in the South. I forget where. And I heard, a guy came up, introduced himself to me, and his name was Goldstein. And I heard a Jew speaking with a thick Southern accent. And he was as Jewish as me and you, but he had a thick Southern accent. So those cultures also influence us, and it creates a cultural dynamic that really fascinates me to this day about, our Jewish populations, specifically in my area of interest, the Southwest.
Yeah, first off, thanks. I thank you, and thanks everyone. I'm sure everyone else here thanks you for bringing to light these areas of the Southwest that I guess really haven't been portrayed much on film previously. I guess they're in books and stuff like that, but not as much on film. I want to encourage everyone. I put the link in there at www.cinewest.net. But if you do want to check out other Isaac's other films, Tawana Jews and San Diego Jews and Holler Rising, which was the prequel to this film, I definitely encourage you to go to that website to check it out. And Isaac, I was wondering if you could tell us, probably in closing here, the new projects you mentioned, like Harry Crosby and El Paso. Not to put a timetable on necessarily, but when do you think those will be available for all of us to enjoy?
Okay, well, on this computer that I'm talking to you, I have my assistant editor. Now that I'm vaccinated against COVID, and we're working here with our editor in LA remotely, and we have pretty much what we call locked picture on the journeys of Harry Crosby. It's a fascinating story that I'm really excited about. It's about a 92-year-old living legend from San Diego, one of the first photographers turned historians to document the Baja Peninsula. And we hope to be finishing with that probably late April, early May. The El Paso documentary, Rabbi Leon is helping me get the word out among the community. We're literally fundraising with the support of a sort of a challenge grant from the Feinberg Foundation, the Feinberg family from El Paso, pioneer family actually from El Paso. So that one, I hope, my goal is to start interviewing people for Jewish El Paso once we get the funding before the summer, before June. If I can start shooting before June, the El Paso Jewish documentary, it'll probably take 6 months to do all the editing and post-production. So if I get lucky, if the gods of filmmaking and fundraising connect, I should have El Paso Jews finished before the end of the year.
Very cool. Well, we went to any other questions out there for Isaac?
If I may, I just want to say hi, Isaac. I couldn't join you early, but I'm here. Nice to see you.
Can you put Blanca on?
Yeah, she's
one of my stars in a long journey. I want her to say hello to everybody.
Yeah, there you go.
Hi, everyone. I hope that you are enjoying the film. I'm super honored that Isaac invited me to be part of it, and I just hope that you are getting to know us a little bit more, and we're here to answer any questions you might have on any of any questions regarding crypto Jews that I can help. Thank you.
Oh, by the way, Blanca, we are having this. Justin and Noel in El Paso are having the exact same Q&A format with Rabbi Leon on the. Well, Justin, you announced it, and I'm sure they'd love to have you there too.
Yeah, I was actually going to let Noel. I think El Pasoans know this, but Houstonians may not. We actually there's the opportunity next week at 3 p.m. Central, 2 p.m. Mountain to continue the discussion about a long journey of the hidden Jews of the Southwest. Rabbi Stephen Leon, who is a former rabbi at B'nai Zion, is going to join us to kind of talk about the film as well. And so to talk a little bit about that more is Noel from Temple Sinai.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you so much, Isaac, for that wonderful talk. That was fascinating, and the wonderful film. And it's nice to see you here, Blanca, as well. Yeah, we're going to be doing a Q&A with Rabbi Leon next Sunday at 2 p.m. Mountain Standard Time here. And he's going to be going in a little bit more in depth with his work with the crypto Jews here that he's done extensive research and work in El Paso and in Mexico and actually globally. But he's also written a book called The Third Commandment and Return of the Anusim, a rabbi's memoir of an incredible people, that came out in 2017. So he's going to be sharing some of his thoughts and his journey and some of his experiences as he's gone along the way since he came to El Paso, I think in 1986. He's been here, and this journey has been a very integral part of his life. So if you need the link and you're in Houston for the Zoom session, because it will be a different Zoom link than today, if you're in Houston, contact Justin and he can give you the link. If you're here in El Paso, it'll be sent out in either the B'nai Zion email or the Temple Mount Sinai email, or if you need it, you can email me directly, and I'm going to put my email in the chat and I'll send it to you as well. Or if you need the link through the film, you can contact Justin or contact myself, and we'll give that to you. And I invite you to join us next week for a wonderful discussion I know that we'll have with Rabbi Leon as well. So thank you.
Thanks everyone for coming today. Thanks for watching the film. Thanks for joining us, and hope to see more of you next week for kind of the continuation of the program on A Long Journey, The Hidden Jews of the Southwest. So thanks very much.